Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. After nearly a century, the Turks have voted to move the center of gravity of power from parliament to the president. Sunday's referendum, a narrow one, too narrow, say many of those in the opposition. With us to talk about it from Istanbul, Barçın Yenanç, journalist and columnist at Hurriyet Daily News. Joining us from the capital, Ankara, Yunus Paksoy, reporter at Daily Sabah. From London, Zia Meral, resident fellow at the Center for Historical Analysis and Conflict Research at the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. And with us from Beirut, she teaches at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po, and at St. Joseph's University in Lebanon, Jana Jabor, who's just back from Ankara, watching the run-up to Sunday's vote. Now, we were talking before the break about how President Erdogan is now going to handle the European Union. We've had those EU accession talks, which have lasted now for nearly 2 decades. The German foreign minister says if Erdogan reinstates the death penalty, those EU accession talks are dead and buried. More broadly, let's listen to how Sigmar Gabriel approaches fellow NATO member Turkey going forward from here on in.
I think we have to be level-headed as we move forward, because the result shows that Turkish society is deeply divided. It will largely depend on whether Erdogan does everything possible to go after his opponents. If he reacts using strength and Turkish society is driven apart, that will certainly be bad for Turkey. And we in Europe have to think about the possibilities we have to exert influence so that the country remains democratic.
Zia Meral, the president of Turkey answering in kind, perhaps, saying that the country could have a referendum on suspending EU accession talks if necessary. At this point in time, it seems as though neither side really wants to come forward and say that Turkey is not going to be joining the EU. But what would severing those ties actually do at this point?
I mean, that has been the same story pretty much since 2004, if you remember, when Cyprus was allowed into EU. That was pretty much the time when Turkish accession has been sealed, and since then multiple chapters has been closed by Cyprus as well as France. But for European Union and for Turkey, even though the end was not too clear and there was never a consensus among European countries about Turkish membership, the process itself had strategic value, economic reasons, geopolitical reasons, and also very much social and political reasons too. But look at it now through the lens of the domestic politics across Europe, particularly with the rise of far right. The issues that are in Turkey, questions around actually economic turbulence, both within the Union, but also Turkey as well too. There are now genuine questions asked whether or not the Brexit process has now opened up a new channel for EU and Turkey to imagine a new relationship beyond this kind of Gordian knot that is fast become a really counterproductive. And the way forward for that would be the customs union agreement that has been up for renewal for some time, and the discussions have been continuing. This might very well be the framework within which EU and Turkey could focus on a positive agenda, accept the fact that accession is not going to happen, but do not let this process, the fact that accession won't happen, to destroy the relationships and EU's influence, and also the economic and geopolitical benefits both reap from that. So I think that's the direction that we would have to go. Sadly, that will come as a blow because there's a lot of still people in Turkey still very much pro-Turkish accession into EU, but all the recent studies have shown a drop of that too. And I think given where political turbulence is, President Erdogan is going to play EU comments on Turkey and criticisms of it as a negative rather than actually a positive influence of a candidate country that wants to be in that union.
Zia, when Erdogan came to power in 2002, 2003, he was somebody who looked west. Is he now turning his back on Europe?
It's a complex thing. I mean, Turkey has never really looked at into one single direction, so we really cannot really read Turkey vis-a-vis East versus West spectrum. It's a unique geopolitically positioned country that needs to balance these competing demands. But I think you're really fair and right to say that this government has done a lot for EU accession than any other government has done. And there was genuinely a time that there was a push for opening new chapters and establishing structures, and particularly economic integration. But even Turkey saw that as as an asset, that its European leg was giving it influence in the Middle East and Central Asia and global affairs. A lot has changed, primarily because Europe still doesn't know how to handle Turkey. Turkey still is not really 100% sure how to proceed with that and what reforms apply to it and what standards it wants to achieve. And then the Arab Spring happened, which had substantial impact on Turkey too, as much as Turkey has a substantial impact on it too. The view from Ankara at the moment is really difficult. There's definitely an economic interest to maintain the EU accession and good relationship, but everybody knows for the last 2 years, particularly since the coup attempt too, there is really a complete complete breakdown of trust between European capitals and Ankara. And I think President Erdogan still remembers the fact that most European statesmen really did not appreciate the gravity of the coup attempt and the genuine concerns President Erdogan and his party were facing from this military coup.
Janet Jabour, when we at the France 24 debate think back to 2011, 2012, when we went to places like Cairo and where you are, to Beirut, people there, for them, Turkey was a shining example of what could be. After this vote on Sunday, where you are in Beirut, what do people think of Erdogan? What do they think of the direction of Turkey?
François, you would be surprised to know that in Beirut, in Tripoli, in northern Lebanon, but also in other parts of the Middle East, Arab people have been campaigning for Recep Tayyip Erdogan and for the constitutional reform. They have been creating pages on social media in order to promote the constitutional referendum, of course knowing that they are Arab citizens, so they do not have the right to vote. So why were they doing that? Simply because today, in the minds of many Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim populations, Recep Tayyip Erdogan represents a hope. For them, he represents the hope to rebalance West-East relations, to rebalance North-South relations. They see that he is a leader who has the courage to stand up to the West and to say that the Middle East and the Muslim countries are not subjugated to the imperialist Westerners. But here I would like also to make a point to pick up actually on Zia's point. What you see is that Recep Tayyip Erdogan moved from being a Muslim Democrat to being an Islamo-nationalist. And I think this shift was due to two things. First of all, the Syrian crisis. In fact, today Recep Tayyip Erdogan feels encircled in the region. He feels threatened by Syria, by Daesh, by the PKK. And so he is holding his grip on power in internal politics. And the second element that pushed him to become an Islamo-nationalist is Turkey's or the EU's rejection of Turkey. In fact, Recep Tayyip Erdogan really wanted in the 2000s Turkey to become member of the EU because he thought that this would be one way, one tool to making Turkey a central power and a global actor in the international arena. Now he felt humiliated, and a majority of Turks, even Turks in the diaspora today, massively voted for the yes because they feel humiliated and insulted by Europe. So as a backlash, they are voting for a president who has an aggressive, violent tone vis-à-vis the West and who shows that Turkey is no longer the sick man of Europe. And in that sense, I would like to say that EU's policy toward Turkey and Recep Tayyip Erdogan is really counterproductive.
So when Sigmar Gabriel, when we hear him there, like we did earlier, when we hear the German foreign minister there cautioning Turkey, that has the opposite effect?
Exactly. This image also of the Turkish social affairs minister being excluded and prevented from entering the Turkish consulate in the Netherlands and being pushed away by the dogs of the Netherlands police was really seen as an act of humiliation. And as a backlash, Turkish people in the diaspora voted for the yes.
Yunus Paksoy, let me ask you, remember at the beginning of the show, we heard from Erdogan at that rally today in Ankara, and he's talked about the Crusaders' ideology in the West and their lackeys have attacked us, but we didn't give up. This use of the word Crusaders, what do you make of it?
Actually, we need to make one thing clear. Is Erdogan drifting away from Europe, or is Europe, pushing Erdogan away from itself? This is a really serious question because Erdogan was really sincere and his governments were really sincere in, entering into the EU and they were taking firm steps towards that goal. But the EU, they're backpedaling. They're trying to block Turkey from entering the 28-nation bloc. So we need to say that Europe is pushing Turkey away from itself, and Erdogan is trying to capitalize on that because Erdogan has a conservative and a nationalist base, so to speak, and he needs to win votes on that, and he's actually using the European Union. The problems with the European Union to get more votes, and that's understandable. So,
but has the man changed? You heard Janet Jabbour say how he went from being a Muslim Democrat back in the early 2000s to now being an Islamist nationalist. Do you agree with that?
We need to ask ourselves: is this his decision to turn into such a man? I think it's Europe's fault, and they're not trying to understand Turkey's main dynamics or Erdogan's dynamics. They're just saying that Turkey is divided, and they don't want to see the other half of the population. They're just trying to work with the secular, and I quote it, secular and modern side of Turkey, and they're just trying to oversee the other half. And that's the problem. They're just saying that we want a respectful tone from Erdogan and his government, but they're not really doing the same themselves. And we saw it in Brussels, we saw it in Berlin, and also in the Netherlands, and they were not really respectful towards the people of Turkey and towards Erdogan's government. So who is to blame in this situation? We need to ask this. And Erdogan has not, suddenly turned into an Islamist figure. So Europe has to, look and search for its problems in this strife, I guess.
All right, you were talking about how Turkey's divisions are at the end of the day what Europe isn't really seeing. Again, it was the coastal areas and the big cities versus the heartland in Sunday's vote. Here you can see on this map the yes is the parts in green. Now, how do you bridge that growing divide? Let's listen to the Turkish Prime Minister.
Those who said yes and no are the same. They are both valuable. Thank you again to our citizens who voted yes and no.
At least 50% of the population said no to this. Therefore, these constitutional changes lost their quality of being a societal agreement.
Barçın Yenaç, you're speaking to us from Istanbul, where despite the rain, there have been protests this Monday. Again, how are we going to bridge that divide between, and this story, by the way, is familiar to those who follow Brexit, between the big cities and the outer areas. It's a theme that we're seeing here in France ahead of our own presidential election.
Well, this is currently the challenge facing Recep Tayyip Erdogan. As I said in the past, getting 30% of the votes was enough to land him as prime minister. Today, he needs to have this bridge in order to have 50+1%. And I think Mr. Erdogan also knows that he is a hope for the Middle East as long as he remains within the European system. He is respected in the Middle East precisely because Turkey is at the same playing field with Europe as long as it remains a candidate to the European Union. The moment the relationship breaks up, Turkey will become just any other Middle Eastern country, just like Jordan or Egypt, and it will lose its importance and value. And I think Mr. Erdogan is aware of that as well. That's why I have the feeling that he has this double-track policy on the rhetoric in order to lure to the populist, in order to appeal to those who feel that Turkey is being humiliated by the European Union. He is bashing European Union. He's talking about capital punishment, etc., etc. But behind the scenes, political and economic relations and dialogue is continuing with the European Union. And again, he is going to face an election in 2 years' time, and he needs to have the support of the urban, educated conservatives. For that, he needs to deliver on education, on economic situation. How can he improve the deteriorating economic situation without remaining on the cooperation level with the European Union? Because Europe, at the end of the day, remains #1 trade partner to Turkey, and as I said, he has made an appeal to the Nationalist Movement Party in order to bring back capital punishment. But the Nationalist Movement Party has not even delivered on the Yes campaign. How can he trust the nationalists in order to bring back the capital punishment? And he cannot even trust the Kurds. They will be against as well. So I think in the short term, he is sort of using this as a rhetoric in order to consolidate the votes he's getting in the rural parts of the society. But behind the scenes, I think Turkey will continue to keep some kind of a relationship between Europe in order to continue the flow of economic relationship. And honestly, I think it suits the interest of the European Union as well. The more Turkey becomes democratic, the more its membership becomes a reality. And this is something that the Europeans do not want as well. I think they are content of having a transactional relationship with Turkey.
All right, Zia Maral, let me get your reaction. You just heard Barcin Yenanch talk about the need to appeal to European-educated conservatives. One question we haven't asked is, what future for Erdogan's own party, the AKP? At the beginning, there was that alliance with those that he is fighting today, the Gulenists. There's also those who've gone quiet, like his former Prime Minister, Ahmet Davutoglu. Can he hold it all together, Erdogan?
Just on your first point about the youth thing, I agree with Barcin's assessment, and in principle, all of these are very valid points. The problem is, of course, from a European perspective, how those very Turkish domestic political polemics are being perceived in Europe is very destructive. When President, for example, utters the words Nazi to refer to the developments, etc., some of these bridges have been burned, and it's not really going to be easily patched with easy goodwill, etc. But I totally agree the economic and geopolitical necessities will demand a working relationship, and that's why a new customs union framework might be meaningful. Coming to the future of AKP, the President Erdogan is about to become a member of the AKP and get hold of the party's leadership too. Thus far, he's been asserting that influence indirectly, and technically he's not the head of the party. That's actually him bringing back the party back to a political momentum in lead up to the 2019 elections. The fact that they lost Istanbul and Ankara, which was a stronghold and is very significant, is going to be an in-party tension, particularly because the mayor of Ankara is a larger-than-life figure, which clearly has played a role in the drop in the votes of AKP. So we forecast maybe a change in his prolonged position in the city. But at the same time, I think Erdogan has been maneuvering the party in such a way that there is no contender, there is not much pressure on him. In the pro-AK party press for the last 2 days, there's been a lot of self-reflexive and critical articles actually saying the party should learn from the fact that this is a marginal victory, but we're also losing votes. And actually we're losing possibly urban, educated, religious, conservative Turks who actually benefited from AKP's reign and are not happy with the way that things are going. That might very well put a pressure on the party to basically play this double track of still appealing to nationalists. But the moment you do that, then you jeopardize the Kurdish votes. But I think the question of Kurdish votes, which are very important for Erdogan's future and high percentage of votes, that's a lot to do with what happens in Syria and whether PKK will now step down from their attacks in Turkey, whether they will allow a much more political space to open up, and whether President Erdogan and the government will allow the Kurdish politics once again to emerge rather than Kurdish militancy. And that again comes down to what President Trump does in regards to its Syria policy. So not everything is actually in Erdogan's control. So he is going to be reactionary and playing within a much more limited field than we think he often does.
Yeah, how Erdogan handles the PKK insurgency in the southeast, a major question. Unfortunately, not for this time, though, because we're running out of time. I want to thank you, Zia Maral, for being with us from London. I want to thank Yunus Paksoy in Ankara, Barcin Yenanch in Istanbul, and Jana Jabbour for being with us from Beirut, Lebanon.